very unique thing, then I'm wrong, because human beings are what we are. Homo sapiens, we call ourselves, and we are the most intelligent beings. We consider ourselves to be the most intelligent beings, at least on this planet Earth, if not in the universe. And organizations run using this human resource. So we have to first understand that what is the type of organizations we are working in, what are the goals of these organizations, and how they go about using or managing the most important resource at its disposal, that is human resource. See, organizations are so varied nowadays that we really cannot count. In fact, one can say that the evolvement of organizations in the past century, or if I may say even the past 2 decades, have been very, very large. I mean, very, very fast also. We all know that as bankers, we are part of an industry which we broadly call the service industry. And service industry is one of those industries which is very, very people oriented. That means the human part or the employees part, they play a very important part in the organizational scheme of things. Now, we are in the financial sector, so we are doing helping out people with their finances and all sorts of financial solutions. So we have to have a very, very strong interaction with people. Naturally, the employee has to be very, very proactive, and the employee has to be, one can say, knowledgeable, and at the same time come across as somebody who is very, very connected with the people they are working with, I mean the customers. Naturally, it becomes essential that the employees themselves are understood by the organization, and the organization takes all possible measures to develop these employees so as to give them these characteristics. Now, this is all about the resource management. But if we look back a little in the history of human resource management, we will come across certain stages. See, the effective use of people, like we said, is a big challenge. Why? Because of this. Can you come across on this VUCA? This VUCA environment finds us or finds the organizations in a very, very challenging situation, because we are working in a system where there is a lot of volatility. And volatility means things are changing around very, very fast. We don't know what happens from one day to the next. It's something like that. So it isn't very easy to plan for a very long time. Add to that, if there is volatility, there is a lot of uncertainty. Am I coming across clear to you? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Clear one.
Okay,
Clear,
okay,
ma'am.
okay. Because, okay, fine. So see, uncertainty naturally means that it makes people jittery. We do not know what is going to happen next. And as it is, the situation is so fluid. So it gives a lot of complexity, you know, because it is not so simple to plan out and to think that we will go along this path. And that adds to the ambiguity factor, because our planning cannot be so very simple and so very straightforward. So this VUCA environment makes it even more challenging for organizations to prepare their people to meet the business goals. Had it been a simple type of environment, naturally it would have been much more comfortable. So what organizations have to do now, they have to constantly study the environment. We cannot just lay back and sit around, because the environment is constantly changing. And not only that, we have to keep on innovating. In our case, for instance, we have to innovate with the technology, we have to innovate with the products, and we have to match with the changing environment. Now, if only we had to innovate with the products and the technology, then probably it would have been something still controllable. But you see, we have to adapt our people with that, no? because only technology will do nothing, neither with products. If it is only that we can plan and do, that will not help, because it is ultimately our people, that means our employees, we have to adapt at it and we have to deliver it to our customers. So managing this part is the most important uh, course that has to be done by the human resource management department. So this is the background, we can say, and how the HR goes about it. No, we sometimes feel that HR is like only about certain policies. Certain policies means certain policies to do only with the working conditions and welfare of the employees. But we'll see that it is much bigger to that. That means it is also to do with the business model or the business policy of the organization as a whole, which the HR has to keep at the back of its mind before it goes about doing any policies, developing any policies for the people. So see, if you look back a little, means how it started, why the HR department at all started. The initial perspectives will tell us that after the Industrial Revolution, it was the first time that organizations came up in a large scale. We started with factories. I said now that we have different types of industries and services, but initially the services were less. So we started with factories. Now that factory thing was also a change from the agrarian society. That means people were only doing agriculture and they had artisans who were skilled in certain trades, like say the carpenters or the weavers or the potters, like that. So people were doing their independent thing, and there was no need for any particular department or any particular set of people to be looking after or guiding other people. They were doing their own thing. But once factories started, what happened is this: hundreds and thousands of people got to work in these factories. And if you recall history again a little, we'll see that this majorly happened in the Americas. Industrial Revolution, as we all know, it actually happened in Europe, but its manifestation started in USA, because there were migrants and people moved from Europe to America for the new land to find their fortune there. And what they landed up, most of them or many of them, are in these new factories that were being set up by entrepreneurs there. So these people who had actually come from an agricultural background had no idea how to work in a factory. So a random sort of arrangement was made in which the factory owners would hire these people, sometimes straight out of the, the dockyard. They landed from the ship, say in New York, the Statue of Liberty, that is the sign. And right from there, there would be people who would take them straight away to the factory floors, sort of like this. So they were lacking skills. They didn't know what to do, how to work. And the factory managers or the management also, they were least bothered. They didn't know how to handle these people as such. They only thought that how to teach them the basic skills to do the particular type of work that they have to do and get them to work. So it was a very rudimentary type of arrangement, and we can say that in that early stage, a human being working in the factory was no better or not seen anything different than only another machine. So what actually happened is this, that people were seen as a machine. Okay, I think, okay, this is the initial perspective, that they gave more importance to the activity that is happening in the factory space, factory floors. They were more keen to get the result. That means they were more keen on the products. And people were just tools, just like other machines, who are to come and work as per the direction of the management. They would tell you that you just tighten this screw for 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, whatever. Somebody else would be doing another part, and the fellow would be doing the same thing over and over and over again. So there was no department as such to look after the welfare of the people. It was not required. That was not the outlook. People came in, they punched, that is the entry time. Then they started a particular type of work which they were doing all through the day, and in fact all through their working days, all through their career, one may say. And after that, the more one produced, the more one delivered. Accordingly, you got piece rate payment, and that was it. So what they thought, that how to extract, how to get the best out of the people, how to get the maximum output of the people. So they did scientific management. They thought it would be easier and it would be better if we could make the process of production very, very scientific. So they did, extensive studies on time and motion. Which motions would take least time to perform a work? That they called scientific management. There was actually no thought of a human being as a person coming to work. It was like a machine only. So Frederick Taylor, he was one of the initial advocators, and according to the thought of that time, he did this time and motion study, and he wanted to get, he advised that you can get maximum output from workers out of this. Charles Babbage, now this name may be familiar to many of you because he is also considered the father of the modern computer. So he said that division of labor, if you divide the work into small bits, everybody performing their bit, then you get greater productivity. But again, there was no concern for the man behind the work. So these were the initial thought. And if you can call the department that was looking after the human beings working in the organization, you could say it was a very small department, so to say. One would be the timekeeper who would manage and keep record of when one came in and when one went out. And the other would be the supervisor, because the supervisor would keep track of how much one was producing, so that at the end of the day or at the end of the week, he would be made payment accordingly. That was it. That was the entire HR department, if you can't call it that way. So that was the outfit. Now, there was one gentleman called Robert Owen. He was a little more charitable. He said that workers are vital machine. They're machine, no more than that. But okay, they are vital because their contribution is somewhat more in the production process. So he said we should be providing a little more, little better conditions for work, because at that time there were no such ideas about any paid leave, any leave. So paid leave was out of the question. Any other benefits associated with the workplace available to the employees, that was quite unthought of. Nobody had thought about it actually. And in the country also, in the America was at that time going through a lot of strife, civil wars and all. So nobody had much time to spare for how the laborers were faring at the factory place. Everybody thought they had to go to work, earn their money, finish. So Robert Owen was also one of the persons who first formulated or who first demanded. He raised the question that people should have a scheduled time of work. He said 8 hours work day. That is what Robert Owen had pointed out, that should be allowed for people. Because otherwise it was thought that the longer you worked or the more you worked, the more you could produce. And because you could produce more, you would get paid more. So naturally, it was understood that people would be willing to work more, produce more, because they get paid more. The scientific management theory, this also believed that people are rational, people value money. So rational economic theory, if I work more, if I produce more, I get paid more. So I should be unquestioningly following my management's diktat to work as much as possible, as long as possible, because I'm earning money. So it was a very simple equation that they had, the scientific management and the rational economic theory that was practiced at that time. I don't say that it has completely gone out of the wind. No, it is still practiced in many places. But this is how it started initially in the first phase of human resource development process. Am I getting? So this Eldon Mayo, he was another person who did this very important study called the Hawthorne studies. Actually, it's called Hawthorne, but it was done in a place called a Western Electrical Factory. So there he did some studies to understand that how really people felt when they worked. Do they come detached? Do they keep their emotions at home? Do they keep all other traits as a human being at home when they come to work? He found no. None of us can do that. We cannot keep our persona at home and go to work. We are not machines really. So when his studies were conducted, he found that people form relationships at work. Relationships mean that they actually get to know, get to have some sort of a contact with workers, other workers, their subordinates, their peers. We are spending so much time. So it's but natural that we will have a lot of relationships with people around us. And how we behave with each other, how we get treated by our boss, how we react with our peers, they naturally have an impact on our working also. So management needs to understand that, and proper situations or proper conditions need to be prepared for that, so that people gel well with each other, you know. So this was one of the outcomes of these Hawthorne studies, and it gave rise to what is known as the social man theory. That means people are just like they are outside, they form a society, they are part of a society. So at the workplace also, due to our long association with our peers and subordinates and bosses, there also we form social relationships. And that was the first challenge to the rational economic theory, which had only considered people to be like machine coming to work for money. So it pointed out that employees develop various relationships due to or in the process of organizational interaction. So as time passed by, the evolution or the development of the HR processes also started. First, we said that we had the time officers who were keeping time just to make out the wages payment. The next step in the development of the HR department or functions was welfare secretary. This we are talking about the first stage of HR. So factories started to engage from within the employees, from within the workers only. They would pick out one person and called him the welfare or social secretary. Now this person was supposedly looking after the welfare of the people, welfare of the employees. But basically, the idea was that he would report to the management if people were trying to form unions, you know, because even that time, we were talking about the 19th century, or the late 19th century, when at that time also the laws were not there so much, and the management had the total say in the running of any organization. So they wanted to make people work as per their diktat completely. There was at this time also very little leeway, very little room given to the workers in the place. But finally what happened is this: the civil war, as we say, it got over the country, that is America. They started formulating various labor laws. Also, there were the various states, they had their different laws also. So factories also had, by this time, they had grown in size, they had multi-locational presence, you know, they were spreading in very fast manner. So this time they had to abide by certain rules and regulations. So the human resource functions also expanded a little, and they actually engaged a person called a labor welfare officer. labor welfare officer was supposed to look and make sure that the organization was meeting all the laws that has been prescribed by the state or by the government. Like uh, this, by this time you had those leave, then um, some other functions, some other benefits which were prescribed by the government. These had to be taken care of. So the labor welfare officer was doing this, and he was also negotiating with the employees for their wages, or if they had some dispute, then the tribunals. So the labor welfare officer's function was little more enhanced. Then came the 20th century. You know, we had the World War, and we had again development in technology coming in. Also, we had a lot of experiments being done on human beings behavior, what we call psychological and behavioral experiments. So these were having an impact on the society, and these were having an impact on the organizations as well. So the management started adopting some of these practices that were being prescribed by behavioral scientists out of their research. Okay, so development was coming in this fashion. So they set up what is called the personnel department. In short, we call it the PRS. You people now who have joined lately, you are all possibly working in banks for not very many years. So you have come under HR department only. But earlier people will say that we had the PRS department. PRS department was keeping all records of people. They did the recruitment, uh, they kept all records of people's transfer, posting, their training, and also they all kept records of all the wages or salaries that were payable to them. These were basically the functions of the personnel department. It became much more organized. It became much more oriented towards delivering benefits to the people working. And of course, it had to abide by all these sorts of rules and regulations that had been set up by the governments. And in fact, like I said, that by the time the PRS form came in the organization, many organizations had also woken up to the fact that human beings are unique. Human beings need to be treated definitely differently from machine, and human beings do offer or do bring that extra something to the organization, which makes it totally outstanding or otherwise. Meaning to say that if we have a number of organizations in one field, and they have got, say, the same type of technology and the same type of other resources, then that organization will develop faster, or that organization will be superior, which has got a better quality of human beings. So this is the identifier of an organization, this resource, this particular resource. Like you see, we use so many other resources like land, building, and finance, etc., etc. Technology is one of the resource. But this is the time when we started waking up to the fact that the human beings are the differentiating factor. Okay, and this human resource development was the next step. That means the HRD, it came as a next step towards the elevation from the personnel department. So the human resource development, or as we know now, this HRD, that came later to this. So far we have just talked about the first stage or the stages of development of HR. Okay. So are you with me? It is initial, because we have, this is the initial stage. Sometimes we get a couple of questions about the development of the stage, although in HR, what we get is mostly case studies through which we have to be able to find out like the various theories we will be talking later. The profiling of people are done, or situations in the workplace, they are described in the case study. And out of that, we have to choose the proper answers. So direct questions are very few and very far between, maybe one or two sometimes. But when we get direct questions, objective one or two, one of these could be like, what was this? Yeah, please unmute. Please mute your screen. Hello, somebody's got their screen, got their device.
Rajiv, please mute.
Rajiv, is it? Rajiv, please mute your this thing. Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is how we find that you are moving from considering people just like machine to considering people as human beings as such. So this process actually took quite a long time, maybe 100 years or so, before this transition came. Not to say that all the earlier ideas of how the employees are to be treated, they have all been abandoned. They continue to exist, okay? But there has been a massive or a very, very long, big transformation in how human beings are now seen. They are seen as the most important asset. You see that we actually value this asset, and in many companies there is actually a process where this asset is valued and is made a part of the balance sheet, you know, to show how valuable this asset is and how unique this asset is. So this is when we are talking about HRD or human resource development, we have to understand that it is a part of the entire or total human resource management system. Okay, this management system or management principles have started being applied to human resources, we can say, from the mid 20th century, and now it is continuously improving and continuously we are finding further development. So let us see some of the differences. So see, we are now talking a little about the HRD as we know it. HRD, we have to remember, it is a subsystem of HRM. HRM is in totality, that is the human resource management. And human resource management, although it was very rudimentary in the beginning, like I said, there was only the time officer and the supervisor, but still it had the process of recruiting people, like bringing in people to work. It had that is the acquisition. Then they had to promote some people. Those who are found to be more skilled than others, they had to be given a promotion. Administration, even though it was very, very simple, that means only payment of wages, but there was some administration, and it has only grown and become much more like you know, all this posting, all this training, all these keeping track of what people are developing, all these things are part of administration. Disciplining, who is it that please see that you keep your devices in the muted mode, please kindly just check. So these are all parts of HRM and HRD, the development. Now this is the unique thing that has now started happening, but this is a part of HRM only. So there are some traditional functions which continue to get done by HRM. These are some of these traditional functions. And development of human beings as part of the organization and organizational growth is one of the crucial functions that HR has now adopted, and it continues to practice this very strongly. So what we find, that what is the difference then between HRM and HRD? Remembering that HRD is a part of HRM, still how is it different from the earlier form of HRM? See, HRM is mainly maintenance oriented. That means you hire people and you make them work, give them the basic skills and pay them wages in time. So that is a maintenance type. And the organizational structure in case of HRM considers that that department is only one part of the total organization. You know, it's just like one department. It doesn't have to worry about other functions that the organization is doing. So it's maintenance oriented. And because it is maintenance oriented, it only considers that human beings will perform better, employees will perform better if you give them efficiency in the trade or efficiency in the particular type of work they are doing. That was the outlook of earlier HR practices. Then the responsibility of HRM, it rests only with the HR manager. And HRM motivates employees mainly through monetary incentives. So these are some of the traditional outlooks which were practiced, and these are the HRM point of view, the original HR way of looking things as to how to go about with the people part in the organization. But HRD looks at it little differently. Okay, from the time we have adopted this thought of developing human beings, we have started looking at it a little differently. How it sees the HRD is development oriented. This word D is very important. It seeks to develop the employees. Now, developing and making people efficient, these are two different things. When we are making people efficient, it only talks about making somebody efficient or more competent in doing the particular job that that person is doing. Whereas when we are talking about development, it is a far more bigger prospect. It is making a person evolve as an individual, not only in the particular job one is doing. So now organizations think that I need to develop my personnel, not only make them proficient in the particular work that they are doing. So development will involve many other facets, many other areas of that person's improvement. And when person develops, it actually helps that person not only in the organizational work, but in their personal or societal life also. Yet, organizations are willing to give time, spend money, and make all efforts to develop the individual, because they have now found that a developed employee is far more profitable or far more capable of giving the organization the best. So HRD creates a structure that is interdependent or related to all the other departments in the organization. So it tends to develop employees at the organization as a whole. This when we were doing this, when we are doing only as a maintenance part, we were not considering the organization as a whole. And the responsibility of HR policies lies with all the managers across the organization, not only the HR managers, but it is called a staff and line function. What is a staff and line function? This is one of the questions sometimes that gets asked. What is a staff and line function? Staff is anybody who is doing back office work. An HR manager is supposed to be behind the screens. Okay, he or she is developing the policies, etc. But who's going to implement them on the workplace? These are the line functions or line functionaries, that is the supervisors or the people in the front line. For instance, our branch managers. Okay, so these are the people who are working at the floor or working in the front line. HR policies, HR understanding will be, give and take. Like from the line managers, the HR managers will pick up so many ideas. They will get to understand what type of development is needed and what type of job qualifications people require. And at the same time, the line managers are also imbibing the HR policies and making them applicable at the workplace. So in the HRD way of thinking, HR is a line, staff and line function. Whereas in the HRM point of view, it was only the HR manager who had to do all the things in relationship with the people. And HRD motivates employees by satisfying higher needs, not only giving them monetary incentives. There are many other needs that we as human beings have. So HRD takes a whole system look at an individual by developing and incentivizing them and motivating them by so many other means. We will see that what those other means are also there that we are employing. So the role of the HR professional has also changed over the years. Earlier it was considered, remember we said the labor welfare officer, he or she had to be a disciplinarian, had to know certain rules and was just able to keep track of how the people are working in the organization. But no, that will not fit the bill today of the HR professional. HR professional now today has to have a much more supportive role. Supportive role not only for the people, but supporting to the development of the business as well. So they have to have a role in the development and research system in the organization, because organizations are changing their business models also. So the HR personnel must also have understanding that how the organization is going to go forward in the coming days. If I don't know how my organization is going to work, if I have no understanding on that, then how am I going to develop my personnel? How am I going to prepare them? How am I going to mold them? Teach them the new techniques, etc. So HR has to have a good understanding of that also. Previously, we had an operational role, operating only to give certain qualifications to the people. Now we have got a managerial role. The HR people have got a managerial role. That means they have to integrate the work or expectation of the organization with the people who are delivering it. This is the function of a manager, to mold things or to integrate things. Role of developing competence. See, we are developing people in so many areas, not only in the job area. So developing competence comes from first understanding the person. Unless we know the person, unless we are able to understand sort of what is the shortcoming, how can we develop competence? So this is what the HR manager does. Yeah, somebody is, please put this out. I think I can do it. Somebody is drawing, you just don't do this. Please move your pen or whatever you're putting so that these lines do not come. And then we have to understand the process role. That means how the functioning of the organization is going, so that again we can prepare our workforce accordingly. So this is a small question here we need to answer now, that whatever we have seen in the previous slides. What is the full form of VUCA?
Volatility,
Uncertainty,
Yes.
complexity, ambiguity.
Okay, so you have seen the scientific management theory that it talked about being able to organize people in such a way that they can actually do the work in the least possible time, given the maximum productivity, by doing the time and motion study and division of labor. So these were one of the original theories of people management. Is HRM a subset of HRD?
No.
No, it's the other way around. HRD is a subsystem of HRM. HR practices implementation is the job solely of the HR manager. This is also false, no?
False.
Because you have just seen that it is a function of all managers across the organization. Organizations had HR departments right from the beginning. This is also patently false. They had no such department to begin with. Elton Mayo, he conducted the Hawthorne studies.
Hawthorne studies.
Right. HRD develops only the employees?
No, along the organization.
Yes, so it is actually organizational development is also one of the outlooks. HR manager plays an operational role?
False.
No.
Because they are actually playing a managerial role. So this is how we have seen the development that is happening. So this is basically So one of the very, very important part or important function of HR has remained right from the beginning, but now it has got a much more important role, that is of training. You see, earlier, as I mentioned, that the training was very, very simple, rudimentary, like you only taught an individual how to do a particular function, and that function you improve their competence, and you gave them the tools, or you gave them training to become more and more adept at it. But today the training system has to be much more multifaceted, and for that what we have to do, we just cannot ask people to come together and start training. It can never happen that way. So first we need to do a very, very scientific approach to training. So we call it SAT. We have to take a scientific approach, and it begins with, so these are the 5 steps to SAT. The systemic approach to training has got these important 5 steps. And let me tell you that this has been a question or repeated several times. You know, it will be a part like training modules, how they are done. That type of a case study comes very frequently. And this various steps, you know, like I have lined them out, these 5 steps, the order in which they have to be done, that also has come as question a number of times. So please give importance to this. That identification of the training needs. Unless we understand what to train for, we cannot give the training. We cannot do the training just out of our own mind. So HR managers have to first understand what are the training needs with the people. Then we have to design the training, and the training design will depend completely on the KRA and the KSA need of the trainees. Now, what is this KRA? Key responsibility areas. All employees working in the organizations do not have the same type of responsibilities. So whenever we are getting a group, whenever we are choosing a group, identifying a group for training, we have to make sure that we understand that what are the key responsibility areas for those personnel, and accordingly we have to design the training. And in designing the training, we have to also keep the components of KSA. KSA is a short form for knowledge, skill, and attitude. So what quantum of knowledge we want to impart, what would be the skill part of the training, and what is the attitude component of the training. Okay, these are the things that we have to have inbuilt in the training program. So this is very crucial. The designing of the training is a very important part in design. In before, this is a pre-training exercise, but it has to be given maximum effort. Then we actually conduct the training. We have the conduction taking place in so many ways. Like we would have physical training centers. We would have on-the-job training. We would have trainings done by at locations which are outside the bank. Like say, we can send our people to specialized organizations, say like something run by RBI, or somewhere run by NABARD, or somewhere run by other organizations. Okay, sometimes we send people for trainings outside the country also, like RBI may be sending their people to Basel, or even our banks, they send people to other locations outside the country. So we have got various places we can conduct the training. Sometimes the training could be also completely undertaken in a different place. Like say you are sent to the National School of Drama, NSD, for a training. You may consider why at all a banker be sent to NSD. But yes, it happens because there we are doing developmental type of training. Okay, so after that the training has taken place, then we have to do the evaluation of the training. That means how effective has the training been, what changes or has it brought the desired results on the trainees. If it is skill development, has it improved that skill? If it is knowledge improvement, how much knowledge they have acquired? If it is attitudinal change, which is most important, at least as we go up in hierarchy, these requirements differ. So that will be shown through the work, or how they behave at the workplace, how they conduct themselves. So this is the evaluation. And last but not the least, is the selection and development of the trainers. So we have to select the right people as trainers. They could be internal faculty, they could be external faculty, they could be specialists from various areas, and they have to be actually given the brief. They have to be told, they have to be taught, and they have to be groomed to give the training in the proper manner. So this is how we progress towards this training. But we find that there is a big hurdle or a big challenge right in the beginning, because here we are talking about training adults. It is not like teaching children, because see, children, they come with a clean slate, they will come with a clean mind, and they will actually take in everything that the teacher says. So this is called pedagogy. Children are when we are teaching children, that form of teaching is called pedagogy. Whereas adults will come with their own inbuilt set of thinking, their own perspectives, their own experiences. So it becomes a lot more challenging to teach or train adults. And the term used for this training of adults is andragogy. So andragogy has to be much more careful. Andragogy has to do a lot much work. And therefore, they have again taken help of so many theories. So how best to make training useful, training acceptable, or training that can be really put to work for the adult population, that is the employees. So one of the theories that they believe in, they work on, is the mechanistic or behavioristic theory, that we need some input, and the if it is the input is good, then the output will be good. If people like the content, then they will use it. Then the cognitive theory is actually, it talks about the capacity of the human brain. So they say some people are better learners, some people can pick up better, and some people will be little slow in learning things. Then the organism or humanistic theory. This is one very important part, because as adults, we like to use our own liberty. We say that we must be able to exercise our choice. So this humanistic theory says that when we have freedom to learn, if I feel that I'm free and I can choose to learn the way I want to, then we will be more like interested in the learning. So these are some of the theories which are taken care of in designing, in delivering, and in making people attached with the type of training programs or training materials that we are likely to share with them. So the support system for training and development is very important. When we are having the highest people, the highest one can say the executives in the organizations who really believe that human resources are the most important assets, then they will give maximum importance to training and development. If they have some other way of thinking and they do not consider the human assets to be so important, naturally they will have less stress on training and development. So human resources can be developed to an unlimited extent. There's no limit to the potential of the human being. So a healthy climate of openness, enthusiasm, and trust. This is very, very crucial. When this is existing, then human beings become more interested in learning and developing. So HRD has to be planned to benefit both employees and organizations. We have been saying that it is the organizational goal which is achieved through employees. So naturally, HR would be looking forward to do things in a manner so that the employees can deliver best for the organization. So this is, a narrow perspective, that I'm only using my employees for the betterment of the organization. HRD actually should be looking how to also develop and how to benefit the employees, so that employees, when they feel that, okay, these processes are also being useful to myself as an individual, then they become more interested in doing things which are good for the organization. So all forward-looking and healthy organizations, they plan to design things in such a manner that it benefits both the employees and the organization. Employees need to feel a set of belongingness to the organization. If I do not have that sense of belongingness, if I don't like to work in that organization, obviously my contribution will diminish. So HR processes should cultivate a sense of belongingness. Higher the level of management, more attention to be paid to these functions, because see, they are the policymakers, they are the ones who are designing the running of the organization. So naturally, they have to be more supportive towards these. And maintenance of healthy working condition, as we all know, healthy working condition means to say that all these transparency, then sharing of knowledge. So all these contribute to healthy working conditions. This is actually needed for the total growth of the organization. So the training and development system has to be supported by organizations' high honchos. We are talking about attitude here. Attitude, as we all know, is a settled way of thinking or feeling about something, and it is reflected in a person's behavior. And how is attitude formed in our lives? It has got basically three components: emotional, informational, behavioral. Emotional is what we learn from very early ages. Information is as we gather along as we grow. And behavioral means type of behavior we see around us, ourselves, and we also start behaving in the same way. So all these three components develop our attitudes towards something or somebody or some situation. Now, when we go to work, we take these attitudes with us. So our HR has to measure from time to time what are the attitudes people have about various functions, various work, or the goals of the organization. So they have to have this attitude meter, and they need to change this attitude from passive to positive or negative to positive. Otherwise, mere knowledge and skill is not going to give adequate result for the people working there. So can attitude be changed? Yes, attitude can be changed by providing adequate information, because many a times information available with us may not be sufficient, and we are forming our attitude based on that. So if we get adequate information, then possibly our attitude can alter. Introducing a modicum of fear. Sometimes organizations need to bring in disciplining in order to change certain attitudes of employees. But one has to remember that too much fear, too much punishment, or very little punishment may not have the desired result of changing attitudes. Influence of peers, friends, and opinion leaders. This is a very important way of changing attitudes. When we have got a group, peer group, or friends who are having a separate type of attitude, so organizations often do, they identify people who are able to influence others. They change their attitude commensurate with the organizational goals, and they in turn they help change other people's attitudes, that means other employees' attitude. And co-opting means making them part of the function about which we are trying to change the attitude. So give them that work to do, make them responsible for that, and then you will see that their attitude has changed from what it was earlier. So these are how some of the methods of changing our attitude. Now we were talking about the career, about how organizational development takes place and how development of an individual takes place. You know, within the organization, it has to benefit the organization, it has to benefit the employee. So if we have a career concept, a clear career concept path for the employees, then the employees will be willing to join or willing to actually work for the organization, because they know that there are growth prospects for them. Organizations also need people to grow, people to develop their skills, etc., so that they can take on higher and higher responsibilities. Okay, so we have organizations need to list out, and they need to give their employees a clear goals that these are the ways you can grow. But please remember that when career paths are being lined out by organization, it is in no way a guarantee that suppose we say that these are the promotion processes available. after so much duration or after so much skills, you can get promoted to this level. So this is a path I'm saying, but it doesn't say that every employee will get to go to that state, that scale, because here we have got the employee's own contribution of how they want to shape up their career, how much they are interested in developing themselves. And at the same time, in case of a hierarchical organization, we all know that as we go up, the number of posts or vacancies will continue to become less. So these are some of the career concepts which people follow. And Michael Driver, he had listed them out. He said linear, when a person follows an upward path in a hierarchical organization. This is also called a vertical path, which is mostly found in banks like ours. That we go from one scale to another, we go from one step to other, we keep climbing. Steady state. Now these employees, there are a set of employees. Earlier there used to be very many such people. Today, of course, all of us are much more comfortable in choosing linear or other career forms. A steady state where these employees acquire higher skills, but they are not interested in going up higher in the organizational scale. They continue to work in one scale. They don't climb the ladder. In transitory, the individual may hop from one job to another, or one type of one organization to another also, but without much excellence or growth. So they are stagnating in particular level of work, but they may have changed organizations number of times. A spiral concept of this is a very good way to grow, and many individuals today are taking this path. There are opportunities also, are much more than earlier. So here what the individual does, he works hard, acquires skills, constantly developing oneself, and they often move to another organization, sometimes in the um, flatter organizations. Flatter organizations are different from these linear type of hierarchical organizations, where they allow people to move from one job function to other. So spiral is good for them also. So these individuals work hard and acquiring skills, they go to higher positions. Higher positions mean it will also give them more remuneration. So they do that in a relatively shorter time. So they are very, very adept in improving themselves. And another type of career concept is plateau, where a person moves up one hierarchical scale and then doesn't move any further. Just take one promotion and get stable there, doesn't move up any further. So these are the 4+1, 5 type of patterns which have been listed out, which people choose as career concepts. Why people choose these career concepts? Because this Edgar Skene, he explained with the help of these career anchors. He said that people have this within their mind, they have some self-perceived talents or self-perceived needs and motives and self-perceived values and attitudes, which make people actually choose one of the career patterns. So these are the 5 anchors that Edgar Skene had found out. He said some people feel that they have got some technical specialty and they would like to continue in that particular domain. If they are given allowed to rise in that particular domain, they will probably move from one scale to another, but otherwise they will keep in a steady state. Managerial competence, ability to manage people, ability to get work done by other people. So you can understand that those who have managerial competence are far more likely to follow the linear path, because they know that they have the ability to get work done by people. Some people have got security, like tying oneself to a particular organization or a geographic location. You can understand that they will most probably follow the transitory path, because they don't want to give up their particular type of comfort, whatever their comfort area is. Creativity is urge for creating something new successfully. You can very well imagine that this creativity type of people, they are new, they learn new things, they start like to develop themselves in different fields. So obviously these will be good candidates for spiral type of a movement. And autonomy are people who are averse to authority, they prefer freedom. So in most hierarchical organizations this is absent. In some new age organizations they give enough autonomy to employees to work independently, developing their own ideas. Otherwise these autonomy type of people are generally, they are very misfits in hierarchical organizations, because they don't like to go by uh, hierarchical authorized structure. So these people are mostly, they will leave organizations generally after some time to set up their own thing. So these are people like that. So anchors and the career states we have talked about, you can very easily find a relationship, how our career anchors, actually direct the career steps that we take. Although we may not be feeling that way, we may not be really realizing that these career anchors are actually guiding our career choices, step choices, but these anchors are very much responsible for them. So HR needs to find out what are the career anchors among employees, and if necessary, alter them so that it is good for the organization, it is good for the employee themselves. See, in the organization scheme of things, we have talked about the career, and here we find two very important theories. Theories means, as I said, behavioral scientists. They have actually worked on other aspects, on behavioral aspects of people, and this has been brought in for our use in organizational structure also. See, Eric Erikson, he used, we have said 4 life stages. Actually, 4 life stages have been used for understanding the state of an individual in the career stage. But please remember, Eric Erikson had actually talked about 8 life stages in the entire life of a human being. Okay, right from birth to their death, he had divided a person's life stage into 8 stages according to age. Okay, but out of those 8 stages, 4 of the stages from his from the adulthood time that have been brought in to describe how people fare during their career in the organization. Like say adolescence. Adolescence is a time when we come into the organization first time, we are a little uncertain, we are being handheld by other people, we are being given directions how to do things. Okay. At the same time, we feel that we know a lot. So that is the adolescent stage. The young adulthood stage is when we have learned the nitty-gritties of conducting business, knowing how to plan our life. That is young adults, they know. Similarly, in the workplace also, when we have spent a few years, when we know the rudimentary, we have understood the rudimentary of working, we can work independently ourselves. We can also guide some other people around us. So that is the young adulthood stage. The adulthood stage is when we are completely, fully competent in doing work by ourselves, and we can take responsibility for a larger workforce around us. And maturity stage is when we are able to digest, understand whatever the work entails, and we can be actually as the guide. We can become the policy makers. So these are the 4 stages of life that have been incorporated to say or to find out at what stage in our career we are as far as the organization is concerned. The same thing has been said in just different language or different nomenclature by Dalton, Thompson, and Price. In career stages, they said initial stage is the apprentice stage, the learner stage, the colleague stage when we are gelling with others, when we can do independently and guide some other people, mentor stage when we are fully competent, when we are taking a far bigger responsibility, and sponsor stage when we are in the higher management stage. So we have got this, I somehow missed the job analysis, but job analysis have got these 3 steps. One is the, whenever we are doing a job, we have to actually first understand that what are the components of the job. Then we have to understand what are the skill sets required with the job. And finally, we have to find out that for the type of job we are doing, what is the type of remuneration that is being expected. So whenever we are planning the total job family, HR specialists have to find out all these three things, and that is the job analysis. So job analysis has actually got three components: job description, job specification, and job evaluation. Okay, we have seen that SAT list out how many steps for training. We have seen that there are 5 steps to
5.
training, right? Adult learning, that is andragogy, is more challenging than pedagogy. Attitude develops from educational qualification? No, education is not one of the components of attitude. Attitude cannot be changed?
False.
This is false. Of course, it can be changed. And we have this correct sequence we have just seen, that this is the first: apprentice, colleague, mentor, and then sponsor. These are the correct sequence. Career path plan is common in hierarchical organizations. We saw that it is a vertical or linear career path because we go step by step from one scale to another. So this is most common in hierarchical organization. And these are the career anchors, out of which is the odd man out. This is the odd man out because we do not have any career anchor as authority, right? So self-development is the goal for any knowledge organization, because we are saying that employees need to develop themselves. It is for the benefit of the organization. So what are the personal efficacy, or we know about efficiency, but here we are using the word efficacy. Efficacy means it is something more than efficiency, no? So what are the components of this personal efficacy when we become personally more elevated? Is so one is motivation. When we have motivation, that is self-motivation. The second component is self-awareness. We have been discussing, I mean, those who have done class earlier, self-awareness is something that we believe that we are aware about ourselves. That is it is a misplaced belief, because actually speaking, we are not aware of much about ourselves. Although we really think that who knows me better than myself, but actually speaking, our awareness is pretty low. So in improving our personal efficacy, these are the factors which we expect to grow in self-motivation, in self-awareness, in proactivity. Proactivity means being able to think ahead in a volatile or an uncertain situation. Proactivity, that means anticipation and able to think ahead, is very important. And finally, action orientation, that means implementing that whatever we have thought in action. So self-development in context of organization is a threefold thing: at individual level, at interpersonal level, and at group level. We develop by ourselves, we interact with others, how we improve in that, and when we are working in bigger groups, how much more effective we are becoming. So when we grow in all these three, we are actually improving in our personal efficacy. So in motivational levels, this is the individual level we are talking about. So it is gaining individual rewards or working towards societal good or fulfillment of team goals. So these are some of the motivations within us which helps us to perform. So the human resource approach emphasizes creativity and participation in decision making. They say this gives us more motivation. The human relations approach says that when we allow people to become this and develop more sense of belongingness, then people get more motivated. And the traditional approach to motivate people is that only money speaks. So you can very well understand that these two are better methods in order to improve our motivational level of the employees. Now sometimes this power bases that we have, not sometimes, it is always, but the power bases we have, these are also our way of, it shows a lot in our behavior. Sometimes we are able to camouflage them undoubtedly, but our inherent requirement of power. So power bases are of these many types. Somebody likes to use coercive power, ability to threaten. Somebody enjoys that. Somebody has got more this thing on legitimate or position power. As we grow up in hierarchy, our power increases. Somebody is motivated to use that more. Somebody is reward power. Somebody says that if I'm able to reward others, that is my motivation. Now see, you are in a position to reward only when you are in a bigger, higher position. Otherwise, you cannot exercise that power. Referent power. Referent power means this is because of your knowledge. This referent, expert, and knowledge powers, these are all powers that are gained because you have greater expertise in certain areas, which actually attract people to you. So those who have these motivations, they will continue to develop themselves in at least the knowledge area or the skill area. Reflected power. Reflected power is acquired because you are close to somebody else in power. So this is not a very good motivational uh, power, but yes, many people have this. Charismatic power. Charismatic power means you have got a personality which attracts people on account of so many things, not only your knowledge, but also maybe your behavior, your expressions. So this charismatic power can be a good source of motivational power for some, and emotional power on account of personal relationships. So these are all at individual level how our power bases work. So again, HR needs to find out that from what power base people are working, so that they can, if required, they need to change the power base as well. This is a very important part, and this you must remember, because questions have come from this particular area several times. We may hope it can come this time also. This is interpersonal level self-awareness. Is a self-awareness tool. So known to self, not known to self, known to others, not known to others. These are the four compartments within ourselves, not of these equal dimensions like I have shown here in the slide, but these are areas within us. So this is the first area, known to self, known to others. This is called the arena or transparent accept part of ourself. Not known to others, but known to others. This is a blind part of ourselves. We don't know how our actions, what impact people are having, what idea they are forming. We are not aware of that. So this is a blind part. The closed part or the masked part, this is known to self, but not known to others. And finally, the dark part, which is neither known to ourselves, not known to others. So in two dimensions, known, not known, so self and others. These are the two dimensions, and these are the four segments in which this Johari window is a self-awareness tool. So to remember these segments, we can just remember them as A, B, C, D: arena, blind, closed, and dark. So this is a very important tool also for HR to know the self-awareness level of employees. Because if this is bigger, then this is transparent and open self. This is very important. Higher transparency will make people easily acceptable, easily trustworthy, and this is also important for group formation. Blind self can be changed with the help of feedback and counseling, so that people get to know, get to realize what others are thinking, how others perceive their actions, so they can improve their arena part. The closed part is a manipulative, or what we call the high Machiavelli part of an individual, where we are not giving out as much as we are showing something else, we are thinking something else. So people do not get to see our real self. And dark part can actually be very small, very minuscule. It may never ever surface in our life. So Johari window is an important concept which we need to remember for examination purpose also. Transactional analysis, this is another important concept, which is in our interpersonal level. We have already started the interpersonal level. So it will involve me and others, myself and others. It could be one-to-one, it could be one-to-many. Okay. So here they say transactional analysis, that people have different ego states from where they are working. And the three ego states that we have, we move from one of these ego state to the other ego state continuously during the process of interacting with others. This is what we call transaction, interaction with others. And the parent, adult, and child, these are the three ego states among which we are constantly moving. The other persons with whom we are interacting, they are also moving from one of these, not in any chronological manner, not according to their age. It has nothing to do with age, but this is movement that is taking place. So Eric Berne, who developed this transaction analysis, he said that people have through transactions when transactions take place like this, from a parent to child or from a child to parent, vice versa. These are called true transactions because the parent wants anybody in real life also, a parent and a child relationship is like a parent wants certain response from a child. Okay, so this is a true transaction. This transaction, adult to adult transaction. Adult means when we're in a mature state, when we are thinking, when we are able to rationalize out. When somebody is in an adult mode and I am also in adult mode, this is also an example of a true transaction. Whereas these are examples of cross transactions. Cross means when the transaction is not complementing each other. Somebody is in the parent mode, wanting from the other person the child response and get suppose the adult response. That will be an example of a crossed transaction. That means that transaction will not give the desired satisfaction to both parties. Not that they will start fighting immediately with each other, but there will be a mental block somewhere, mental lock somewhere, so that our future interactions will not be that smooth. So in transaction analysis, we have to make sure to have as many, not completely 100% we can't say, but as many more through transactions and minimize or decline or cross transactions. So this is a next step to transactions. Why we put ourselves in parent ego state or uh, child ego state or adult ego state is because we have put ourselves in certain life positions. This is called the OK syndrome or OK coral. Here also there are four segments you can see. One is the you are okay, I am okay, and you are okay. This is the first segment, I am okay, you are okay. The second segment says I am okay, you are not okay. Everything about me is good, you are always at fault. The third syndrome is I am okay, you are not okay. I'm sorry, I am going the other way. This is the I am okay, you are not okay. This is the type thing where it says that I am not okay, you are okay. And finally, this is a segment I am not okay, you are not okay. So these are the four syndromes people or four life positions people adopt, which in turn helps decide that which is the ego state they are likely to be most of the time. You can see I am okay, you are okay. This says that I have opinion, I have value, you also have value. So this is respecting myself, respecting others. So these people are likely to be in the adult ego state more number of times. I am okay, you are not okay. That means I know everything, you are worthless sort of thing. So these people are more in the parent ego state, and that too in the critical parent ego state. This is I am not okay, you are okay. That means I don't consider that I have much worth. And I consider that you know much more than me. This is more in the child ego state. And this, I am not okay, you are not okay. Fortunately for us, that fewer people are in this area. They have no consideration for others. They have no respect for themselves also. So these are marginal population. They are generally very depressed, very suicidal, and sometimes, or they also form the terrorist or the criminal parts of the society. So these are the 4 stages, life positions people adopt in life. Now one can say why they adopt these positions. This has much to do with our initial upbringing in life. We do not put ourselves, any of us, knowingly in these states. If this is unknowingly put, we are unknowingly put in these states. Psychologists say during the first 6 to 8 years of our life, out of which the first 2 years are very crucial, that how we are being nurtured in our family or in the environment we find ourselves in. The good thing is this, that once we become aware of what life position we are in, HR can help us make aware, we can transform ourselves to a better life position. So that way our ego state handling will also improve, and our transactions also will become more of through transactions.
Madam, I am not okay and you are not okay. Who is it?
I am not okay.
You are not okay.
I am not okay. You are not okay. Like I said, these are people who have no consideration for themselves, who have no consideration for others. They are very pessimistic. They can be very pessimistic. They can be like suicidal. They can be, and because they have no concern for themselves or others, they can be outliers. You know, they are like the terrorist factions we find, or very highly criminal people. No, they form that part.
No, madam. What I'm asking that it is in parental state or adult or child or like that.
No. They are outliers. They do not fall in any of these formal stages at all. You know, they are beyond the normal setups. So thankfully, as I said, they are a smaller part of our. They are either very violent in nature or they are very submissive in nature. They have nothing good to think about themselves. They have nothing good to think about others also. They don't see any prospect of anything improving, so they are doomed, or they think that they can change everything by taking very extreme actions. So they do not come under the normal way of dealing of normal population. Okay.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
We have this concept of, I just take 5 more minutes from you because you have to get a next class also. So this is emotional intelligence, which is found to be very important for development of individuals. This can develop throughout we can develop these throughout our life. And this is actually very much research oriented. Many researchers worked on this, but we talk mostly about Daniel Goleman, who who popularized this theory of emotional intelligence of individuals. So these are the components are self-awareness, the ability to understand our emotions, self-regulations, ability to control our impulses on our moods, and then ability to stop ourselves becoming too judgmental, to think before acting, not to take instantaneous decisions and instantaneous steps to act. Self-motivation, we have seen what we are talking about, self-efficacy. A person in higher emotional intelligence state will also automatically be higher in the scale of self-efficacy. We can relate these when we see this. Self-motivation is higher in these people. Empathy, very important, very crucial, particularly in industries like ours. Ability to understand others and make them treat as we would want them to treat us. And social skills, what we were just talking about in interpersonal relationships, etc. Proficiency in managing relationships, building network, and ability to create rapport. We can do this all when our interpersonal skills have improved so that we can easily connect with other people. And finally, we have seen that in the group level, we have talked about the personal level, we have talked about the interpersonal level, and finally working in the group level, because we are moving from the small individual to ultimately working in teams. So in organizations, the synergy of the people at the workplace is very important, because we are drawing on each other's skills, we are drawing on each other's experiences, we are depending on each other to perform better. We cannot, no matter how skilled one individual is, he or she can never ever deliver to the highest standard unless the people around or there are inputs or there are, the team members, they also pitch in. So it is very important that we are able to develop good teams. And these teams are not constant. These teams get broken up. We get transferred. We get retirements. We get new recruits. So teams are always in a state of flux. They are getting constantly created anew. So being able to develop teams faster, that is also very important. And also the ability of smaller teams to get integrated into bigger teams and finally become the total organization, that is also very important. Like in the branch, we are a small team. When we take various branches together, then we become a region, that is a bigger team. Then we become all the regions together, then we become a zone or a circle, like that, then we become the entire organization. So forming the individual team and gelling of the individual teams in the bigger teams. Because see, all teams are not working at the same place, not the same location, not even with the same organization goal can be same, but all the teams may not be looking at the organizational goal in the same fashion. So how we can integrate these things, that is very important for the ultimate objective of the organization to be fulfilled. So how we can develop these teams? These are the 5 steps. Now these are not always have to be followed sequentially, not like that, because we can jump from one to the other as we become more adept in team building. Nor that we always sit down and we do all these things, write down in paper, nothing like that. It can become an automatic process. But these are these steps basically that members get acquainted, understand their role. This is the forming part. The storming part is the conflict. Conflict means not like we have a hand-to-hand match or we don't bash each other up, nothing like that. Conflict is basically clarification seeking, airing of questions, to and fro, answering of questions so that we understand that what is required out of us and how who is supposed to do what. Then we do the norming or the rules and performance standards, which we mutually accept. We set them out and we accept them. And then conforming. Having the rules is one thing, but adjusting and accepting those norms to work with, that is conforming. And finally, using all these things, then we start behaving in a mature fashion, then our performing starts. And of course, after performing also, we often do that stop and take feedback so that we can analyze and see whether the team goals that we had set, we are able to work along that path or whether we need any changes. So working in teams in today's time, team building process is very important. Any organization which has mastered or which has helped their employees to evolve as good team members is very, that organization will definitely perform better in the marketplace compared to any other organization. And these are the steps. So we can work smart if we have understood this and we are forming teams very seamlessly all the time.